Today, you what? The use of cash is up. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Well, latest post covering finance and property news. Well, an average of more than 50 UK bank branches have closed each month since 2015. And campaigners fear some retailers could stop accepting cash if it becomes too burdensome to process. That said, under government rules, free withdrawals and deposits will need to be available within 1 mile for people living in urban areas, while in rural areas there are concerns over cash deserts, where the maximum distance is 3 miles. Now, this is all very important because cash remains a necessity for millions of people, researchers found, with elderly and those with disabilities among those most likely to struggle, and branches have been more likely to close in disadvantaged areas. Now, of course, banks have pointed to the large reduction in branch use, a trend accelerated by the COVID pandemic, and the popularity of managing money via smartphones as good reasons for diluting their branch network. But a recent survey by Age UK suggested that among those who were uncomfortable about digital banking, the key concerns were fraud and scams, a lack of trust in online banking services, and a lack of computer skills. And now, the British Retail Consortium says cash has grown for the first time in 10 years as shoppers keep a close eye on their budgets while prices rise. They said 19% of purchases were made with notes and coins last year, echoing a report by banks showing a rebound. That's up from 15% in the previous year. Until 2015, notes and coins were used in more than half of transactions, and while cards are now dominating, cash still has its benefits. The consortium said consumers were budgeting carefully to try to cope with the cost of living pressures, and there was also a natural return for cash after it slumped during the pandemic. Its payments policy advisor, Hannah Reagan, said, "We are now seeing a return to many of the pre-pandemic trends in payments, including smaller but more frequent purchases and a return to cash payments." Unfortunately, what has not changed is the ever-increasing scale of fees paid by retailers in order to accept card payments. In fact, retailers spent about £1.26 billion on card processing fees in 2022, the consortium said. And also in September, bank trade finance body UK Finance reported that cash use had risen for the first time in a decade, pointing to the financial impact of rising prices. They did also say nearly 22 million people only use cash once a month, almost all last year. However, about 5 million people still rely on cash, and there has been pressure to ensure access is still available as bank branches and ATMs shut. In 2022, 22.7 billion transactions were made with debit cards, while only 4 billion were cash. Now, interestingly, among a string of closures announced last week, the final bank in Richmond, North Yorkshire, which is part of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's constituency, will be replaced with a shared banking hub. But the Treasury wants to maintain the current level of coverage of free access to cash through ATMs or face-to-face services. In fact, the city regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority, will publish a consultation on how the government's policy could be implemented. Under the new guidance, if a service such as an ATM or branch is withdrawn and a replacement service is needed in the area, then this should be done before the closure takes place. There is a voluntary arrangement currently in place, which means that every high street should have access to cash within a mile, and banks face fines if they fail to provide free access to cash withdrawals for consumers and businesses, the Treasury has confirmed. And the Treasury said the distances were chosen to maintain the current level of coverage of free access to cash through ATMs or face-to-face services. Those limits could be extended if cash use declines in the future. Under the new guidance, if a service such as an ATM or branch is withdrawn and a replacement service is needed in the area, then this should be done before the closure takes place. And a voluntary arrangement is currently in place, which means that every high street should have free access to cash within a mile, and the details of the new policy will come under the microscope, including the starting point and practicalities of distances that have been stipulated. In rural areas, there are concerns over cash deserts. The maximum distance is there 3 miles. Interestingly, GB News launched a Don't Kill Cash campaign in response to concerns that vulnerable people who rely on cash are increasingly being left behind. That was back in August. They unveiled a huge inflatable piggy bank outside Parliament as the channel continued to urge the government to protect the status of cash as legal tender and as a widely accepted means of payment in the UK until at least 2050. We know that increasing numbers of shops don't want to take cash. They don't want the cash handling costs, they said. The campaign has received support from MPs across the political spectrum, and the RMT union leader Mick Lynch is also supporting their campaign, telling GB News that he was absolutely lending his support. He said, "We don't want cash to go out." And the General Secretary of the National Union of Rail, Marine and Transport Workers said it's becoming more and more difficult for those on low budgets, for instance, who use cash as a means of controlling their weekly and monthly spend. Because if you take a fixed amount of money and budget to that, it means you're in control to some extent of your life. And if you're just doing it on the card or some type of tap method, you can quickly run out of control of your life. And the Federation of Small Businesses and the Post Office are also among the supporters of their campaign. And just to put those numbers in context again, more than 5 million adults still rely on cash in the UK. And it's used for about 6 billion transactions each year. Now, there's a couple of interesting observations here. Firstly, there is significant momentum in the UK to make sure that cash access continues. And I also think that legislated guidance from the Treasury is totally appropriate. So I think we need something similar in Australia too, because we can't just leave it to the markets to deal with this. And that other frightening number was how big the transaction costs that businesses are paying just for the benefit of taking card transactions. This, of course, is another example where the banks are milking the economy. And, of course, many small businesses, if they're given cash, will jump at it because it's cheaper and more effective. So don't believe the stories that cash is disappearing fast. The truth is, many people still need cash, want cash, and must have access to cash. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.